Thank you, everybody. Just quick poll of the room here. Developers? InfoSec pros? Sitting in both camps? Just a few. Yeah, there it is. You know Matt's going to say yeah. So hi, my name's Jason. I travel around the world and I talk about stuff, apparently is what I do these days. This year I decided I want to actually do something technical again. And so I bought a burp license and started poking around in my house. And really, I wanted to understand the things that I have in my house could be vulnerable to some kind of attack. They could be causing you to have vulnerabilities in your own home as well. So who is this guy? I consider myself a security enthusiast, much like people that rob banks are, monetary enthusiasts. I'm also somebody that travels around a lot. I consider myself an airline and hotel enthusiast. I fly about every 3 days. I leave here and go to Germany, London, Abu Dhabi. That's next week, right? Like I travel a bit. I'm a big charity enthusiast. I'm wearing a Hackers for Charity t-shirt now. Yeah, HFC sticker. I've been to Africa. I've done, hung out with Johnny a bunch. So I consider myself enthusiastic about a lot of things, as you can tell. I'm also an education enthusiast, and part of what I'm going to do today is talk about how you can instrument yourself to look at the things at home. Anybody here currently hiring? So Arsnake asked, is anybody looking for a job? But you could be sitting next to your coworker. So we don't want you to hold your hands up. But if you are hiring, it looks like I'm the only one. I need somebody east of the Mississippi that understands web application security to any level at this point. I can't find anyone. All of you guys are employed. It's great, right? But it's super hard for me to find people. So enough about me. We've got these things plugged into our house and into our offices, and it turns out we've got IP cameras all over the place, and we've got DVRs, and I think this slide expresses everyone's fear of IoT pretty well. We're all really afraid of this thing called IoT, but we don't really understand it. So I'm going to break it apart a little bit today and show you the common pieces that I found. And I'll talk about, I am under a disclosure with a company, but I'll talk a little bit about what I found with them, and I'll answer the question that's on my lead-in slide. My goal here is just to see what's going on in IoT development. What are these guys doing, right? In one case, I've got a garage door opener company. They make a machine that picks your door up, because we're not strong enough to do that or whatever. But then they hooked it to the internet, right? How many of you enter your home through your garage? That's how I do it, right? So that's kind of an odd thing. So we have to look at those kinds of things. I'm going to help you set yourself up so you can analyze your own garage door if you'd like. And then I'm going to explain to you that in my conversations with these guys, it turns out security is crazy important to them, but sales are more so, right? So they're not really focusing on this stuff. And then I'd like for everybody to ask more questions. I just love questions. So lately, IoT's made the news. September and October, interesting times for all of us to be reading the news about things like Mirai. And if I'm saying that wrong, it's because I read it and no one taught me. Mirai came out in September. It's a scanner. It has an interesting password list that I worked for a scanner company, so as soon as it came out, we all tore it apart and started looking at the passwords and how it worked and all that sort of thing. And then somebody took that code and they did a thing, right? And Dyn got attacked, which was kind of a bummer. My point with this slide is it's a really good time to have an IoT talk, right? Because you can get a lot out of this stuff. So let's look at Mirai just for a second. 61 useful usernames and passwords. You have to realize the last two on the list, one was mother and the other one started with an F. I'm trying to keep it PG-13. Dave did that in his last one. I think it's a good level to fly at. This was some code that would go look for devices, it would find them, and then it would interrogate those devices, and it would use this really short, in my opinion, password list. We generate login brute force lists all the time for our customers, and there are thousands of combinations inside of them. 61, right, took down the East Coast. Didn't take too long. If we look at sort of what's going on in this, Mirai got open sourced, somebody grabbed it, and they decided to start attacking. Who are they attacking? What are they attacking? Well, if you look at the password list, there's some that we all agree should never exist, right? Root, admin, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those are things that, as you look through the list, you just sort of yawn and go, yeah, those are important, or we should probably check for them. And then you see 7UJMK00 admin. Well, that seems pretty interesting, right? So we may want to dig into that just a little bit. So what we'll do is we'll just throw it into a Google search, right? Q equals and the passwords. Anybody guess what I'm going to get? Maybe Shodan. Anything else? I got a link to a CCTV forum, right? Which seemed like a really weird thing until I read the title of the forum, right? And then I went, oh, that password is the default telnet password on some device. And since it's a CCTV forum and this thing is called Dahua IPC, it sounds like it's a Dahua IP camera, right? So Mirai dropped this list out, and I got to ask a question. Did anybody call Dahua and tell them that this thing is out there and we all know about it? No, we didn't. Dang it. If you want to do a little bit more research on any of this stuff, there's another password in here that looks fairly interesting to me. This doesn't look like some randomly generated thing. I haven't looked at it. I don't know what it is, but if you guys want to go pull this up and try to tear it apart, it's probably a good idea. Hopefully this is the last time you have to look at this slide, but I'm sure you're going to see it over and over and over again. I remember where I was on September 11th. I remember where I was when my children were born. I remember where I was when this thing went on, right? I was trying to get on a WebEx. Qualys uses a single sign-on service called Okta. I couldn't get into Okta, so therefore I couldn't get into WebEx because all of the DNS service was having trouble. I open a ticket with RIT, hey, I can't get into Okta. Of course, they're on the West Coast. They haven't heard about this yet, so they reply, and yeah, we can't either. And so, they're working on it as the email that you get back. But really what was going on here is somebody took that password that is the default telnet password on those IP cameras, and they instrumented those devices to attack the rest of the world. Now, I'm going to ask you guys a question. How many IP cameras are there in the world that are connected to the internet, right? It's piles, just the IP cameras. Think about places like England, right, where everything is being recorded at all times. There's tons of IP cameras there. And that's just one device type, right? There's many of these things. It turns out that the DVR systems are also susceptible to this stuff. And there were some passwords in there that were DVR systems as well. So what we need to do if we're working on IoT products or any product that we're plugging in, right, we need to follow a really simple never, ever, ever put the default passwords on. And most of the systems that you buy today, the default password is blank and it makes you put a password on before it functions at all, right? And that's exactly what you want until you start looking at kind of these lower end pieces of the market. I've got an IP camera system at my house that has a DVR plugged into it. It's made by a company called Lorex. It has a dynamic DNS service that pipes the traffic right into the thing, ships with admin as its defaults, right? That sucker is not plugged into my network. I don't let the thing, I know it's got problems. But forwarding traffic onto a device that has default sets, that's awful, right? I think we all can agree we shouldn't do that. People are ignoring updates as well, right? There's firmware updates that fix these things, and we're plugging this stuff in, unpatched, ready to go to the internet. One of the things that I really get frustrated with is when I can get terminal access to something from really far away, right? Shoveling a shell is kind of a complex thing that allows for you to get onto a device, but if I can just telnet onto it, that's terrible. And if I could go over telnet just for a second, I want us to build a branded vulnerability disclosure that says you have telnet. because it seems to me that Shell Shock and Heartbleed are getting plenty of play because they got a logo and a marketing team behind them. If we could get some marketing behind Telnet, I think we could get rid of it. And I'd be pretty stoked about all that. All right, so on to the things that I've learned. The former CISO at the Mayo Clinic, and if you don't know the Mayo Clinic, this is a hospital that has an airport that dignitaries from all over the world fly into. The Mayo Clinic prides themselves on whatever your really hard problem is with your health, we can solve that. The massive airport, huge staff, tons of IT equipment. So as you can imagine, their CISO is a pretty upfront and outstanding guy. And when he talks about IoT, he says, we already understand the internet. It's the things that we don't understand, right? And that's the thing that we really need to focus on. So I have to define IoT a little bit in my own terms and the way I want to look at this. So it's an internet-connected device, right? So it's usually a device or a device controller. In the case of my garage door opener, it's a controller plugged in that radio frequency communicates to the garage door. There's different ways to do this. The Samsung SmartThings is very much the same way. It communicates back to this cloud service. Usually it's a cloud service. I haven't seen a lot of legacy architecture, you know, sort of on-prem stuff. And the reason why I know that is because when you run SSL labs against the endpoints, they all resolve to AWS, right? So Amazon, good job. You guys are really killing it out there. It doesn't seem like Microsoft Azure is really the IoT cloud of choice. Amazon seems to be where everything is. Attack vector, question mark? Maybe, right? Oftentimes they have a web and a mobile app, but usually the web app is like profile administration, right? SmartThings is a good example of this. You can go in and name the devices in your house and tell them how to connect and all that, but you really can't do much. Like I can't turn the lights on, I can't turn the lights off, but when I pull the app out, I can. So it turns out all I got to do is do that communication a little bit differently, right? Push it through burp and I can get on there. So my problem, the thing I wanted to understand was I control the entry and exit of my home through my garage door. This is how I get in and out of my house, and it's common for a few of you guys, right? So who else can open my garage door? Is it just me and my family, or do we have more folks that could just sort of jump on and do whatever they like? I also have some home monitoring things. Samsung SmartThings is the thing I use. You open the door after 10 p.m., all the lights in the house turn on. If you go upstairs, the lights on top of the stairs turn on. If you go downstairs, the lights at the bottom of the stairs. I kind of automate the house, right? I also have a home security camera. It bills itself as a security system camera. So you set this thing on your fireplace mantle or wherever, and if you walk past it, it detects motion, it starts recording, and then it sends you an alert that says, hey, you're armed and you're recording something right now. You can look at it. If it's a burglar in your house, you can push a button and it's got this really loud, annoying thing. Or you can wake your kids up on a Saturday morning when you're in England or whatever. It's fun. Dad, knock it off. So I looked at this and I said, well, what am I doing with these things? What's the danger here, right? All these IoT talks that you see and any of the papers that come out, it's like, your Wi-Fi password is being broadcast by your light bulbs. Yeah, that's a thing, right? Like that's something that you should probably be worried about, and I definitely don't want that to be a thing. But I'm an AppSec guy, so I wasn't going to go tear apart all that. I wanted to look at what's the app look like? What does it look like to communicate back and forth with these controllers and stuff? So I had a little bit of a methodology that I threw together, and I said, well, I'm just going to kind of do a standard web app assessment. I'll just use Burp. I'm familiar with Burp. I use it a bit. I'll have to make my phone communicate. I got to break this communication, right? Because I'm hoping SSL or HTTPS or however you want to say that is happening in the communication. But I don't have any permission, right? And I'm pretty sure I'm violating end user license agreements just by doing this. Oracle would say that. So it turns out that if you don't have permission, you can't do any active things, but man, you can see a lot passively. So here's how I did it. I've got a mobile app, right? A mobile device, my Android device. home router with Wi-Fi stuff, right? Laptop. And then all I did was I went into Burp, and Burp has a setting that says listen on one interface, listen on all interfaces, what do you want to do? So I set it up to listen on all interfaces on port 8080. I went to my phone and said, you have a proxy, it's the IP address of my laptop on port 8080. This is how you're going to communicate. So everything I did would go through the laptop. It would snake through Burp. As you can see, the AWS service is what we're going to be really communicating to. It's what the mobile app talks to. But when I say open the door, look at how the round trip works. I pushed a button on the mobile device, it goes into my laptop, which shuttles it back off to the AWS service. Open the door. The desired state is what they call it. 1 and 0, oddly 1 is open and 0 is closed. I'm pretty happy they went with that parity. But I said open the door, it sent a signal back down to the controller, and then the controller over that dotted line is radio frequency. It tells my garage door open, right? So if we start peeling this apart, in Burp you can just see the transactions happening, right? Don't try to read the screen, I'll zoom in a sec. What I learned just by doing one transaction is this. I can break this open with my own cert, right? So that's a finding, and that's bad. Because if I can get you to use a certificate that I'm controlling, I can watch this remotely. So I could sit near your house, and while you open the door, sniff that traffic. Now I've got your username and password. Or another way to say that is, I now have the keys to your house, right? I can go right through the front door, which happens to be the garage. My garage contains an old car of mine that I really love. I'd hate for you to take. There's a chainsaw in there, so if you need to get in, that's pretty easy. But who locks the man door between their garage and their house? Yeah, you just turn a knob and in you go, right? I don't even think I have a deadbolt on mine. But I got all these cameras and dogs and guns, right? So, so I look at this communication stream, I find the API endpoints, and figure out what they're doing, and I tear it apart a little bit. Really hard to read, but down in the post body, there's an attribute value. It's a 1 or a 0. And next to it, it says desired state, right? So when I push the button to open the door, it sends a post message. In the body, it says desired state equals 1. And the door opens, right? So as you can imagine, the first thing you do as a pen tester is you look at variables. This variable seems to be the one that's changing to cause action to change. So I set it to 0. And I really hope that the door didn't shut. And it did. As soon as I pushed go, it shut. And my wife was standing there with me, and she's like, did you just do that with your laptop? And I said, yeah, I made the door close. And I kind of did a little pulled the shell dance, and she was like, this makes you happy? And I'm like, yeah, this is gold for a talk, like this is going to be great. It sucks that this is broken. So now what do you do? Anybody know what we should do at this point? Yeah, set it into Windows NT condition 0 where you take all the plugs out. What was that? Different garage door opener is a good idea, but I want to solve this problem in a different way because a lot of people go to Home Depot and buy these things, right? So I decided I'm going to call them. Now, this is not a software company. This is not a company that has a big security team. This is not a company that has, alert at their domain. I had no way to get a hold of them. So I was like, first thing, I'll call them, right? Ring into their customer service line. Who do I get? Hey, to set the pin on the outside of your garage door, the thing hanging on the wall, what you got to do is pull the battery out. They're like taking me through pin resets and stuff. And I'm like, no, you have a security flaw. And they're like, yeah, I got nothing, right? So it took me about 2 weeks of back and forth with these guys. Finally, there was a tweet that I'd sent that got someone to answer. And I got a hold of one of their product managers, and he told me that they have never looked at it this way before, right? How many of you are app developers again? How many of you have to go through some kind of security QA when you submit code? I'd be willing to bet it's several, right, of you. Pretty high percentage. Why did this work? Well, it turns out it's because I can split the cert open, right, and they have no inner security communication. They don't have an inner tunnel, right? Everything is predicated on the security of the cert that I have in the app, which we'll go over how do you replace the cert in an app in a second, but they didn't have any verification for the application state. They were counting on the cookies, right? If you send me the right cookies, then you're the right kind of connection. So up you go, right? And it opens the door. My next question then became, I noticed in the communication stream next to the desired state, there was a customer ID number. And I thought to myself, well, if I change that customer ID number, am I going to open some random person's door? Which is an interesting question until you apply the practicality of how do you know if a random person's door opened? You don't, right? So what you do is you call all your friends and say, hey, do you have XYZ garage door? And one of my friends in California has the same setup, right? And I was like, sweet, we got to set up Burp. We got to go get your customer ID. I threw his customer ID into my session that was active and hit go, and it didn't open. And it was a bummer. Right, that was a real bummer because I really wanted to write a Python script that just iterated through all the session IDs and just opened doors. Like it would have been the best thing. But that level of shenanigans was not to be had. So I wasn't able to do any kind of horizontal privilege escalation here. But the thing that I brought to the company was there was also no penalty for me submitting the wrong customer ID against an open session. Right? They should have been doing a comparison amongst the session tokens that I had valid for my account and knew that my customer ID is not the one that I was playing with. And it should have penalized me in some way. Logged me out of the app, logged him out of the app, whatever. But it didn't. He just stood there and opened the door and closed it, and then I tried it, didn't work, and he opened and closed it again. No authentication, no retries, nothing like that. That would have been a little bit better way to do that. Remember, I told you that all of their security was predicated on the cert, right? So fired SSL Labs at this thing. If you haven't used SSL Labs before, it's a free tool that we produced. And it allows for you to look at not just the certificate, but the implementation of the certificate. How's your server set up? What ciphers are you allowing? And all that kind of thing. So here you can see they got a B, which isn't what we strive for. They're using RC4, which in SSL Labs is an immediate, you can't get an A. You didn't show up to every class or whatever, right? So it ended up so that we could break in, but their security on their cert wasn't that great. So I'm in the middle of a disclosure with these guys. It took me forever to get to a product manager. And I sat down in a meeting with these guys and I said, here's how I did it. And they said, all right, well, we're going to try to do that. So the guy went and bought Burp. So DAF owes me money now. And then he tried it and said, yes, you're right. But that cert thing, that's tricky. It would be hard to get somebody to use your cert in a communication. The InfoSec pros in the room, does that sound valid? No, right? And he was like, well, how would you do this? Tell me about this attack. How would this attack actually work? And I said, well, I've got a Wi-Fi pineapple, and it broadcasts ATT Wi-Fi as its signal. And I can sit near your house, and as you drive down the driveway, you're going to connect to Wi-Fi, the one that's near you, so mine. And then at that point, I already have everything I need. Like, we're done at that point, And then I can watch you open and close the door. I now have your username and password because they don't protect that in the stream at all. They're not passing a hash of the password or anything. It's a live password. And so when we look at how this thing is put together, I said, you're predicating all of your security on this certificate that I can break. You need to make it so I can't break it, or you got to realize that this is where your hard stop is. And then he told me, well, the other thing I'd really like to understand is how can I make it so you can't figure my APIs out? Because if I could do that, then none of this matters, right? Like if I can't figure this out. And I said, well, this is web traffic. You're always going to have the endpoint. It's got to route through the internet. Like that question seems a little invalid. And so with my communication with these guys, I basically figured out that they have no security team. There's no security QA that goes on their code. And they offered me a job, like, you want to come do this? And I said, no, I like traveling. And garage doors just aren't that fun. But I recommended them a full pen test. I used to be a pen tester, and I worked with pen test shops, so I put them in contact with them and said, hey, you need to get this done. I also suggested some kind of encrypted communication. So that way, if I break the outer shell, we don't see anything on the inside. I'm in the middle of disclosure with them, so I can't say their name, though I told them, if you look me up on Twitter, you're going to see it. But I said, I'm going to talk about this thing. I'll just, you saw it says redacted all over my slides. But they were really gracious about it. I'm outside the disclosure period. We're like 60 days at this point. But I decided that I would keep, anonymous of their names, simply because they'd never dealt with security disclosure before. And I think this is really important for those of us in the room that do this kind of thing. If you're dealing with an organization that has a security flaw, first of all, they don't know it's there, right? So when you tell them, don't be a jerk about it. They're learning, just like you did, right? And they're now learning that they have a problem, which sucks. And they're probably going to have to go roll code and change everybody's apps and all of that. So I was very gracious with them, except in the tweet. The tweet I sent out, I was pretty rude because I couldn't get anybody to pay attention to this thing, and they finally came back to me. So that's the garage door. If you're looking to do home automation, I happen to have a Samsung SmartThings. I like SmartThings for a couple of reasons. They do an inner encrypted tunnel. I can't see any of their traffic, right? So I couldn't pull any of it apart. It's all encrypted. But this is what, if you go pull their API documentation down, they let you write against their APIs. They just have a special way to do it. You can see how everything works. That piece that says client connectivity at the bottom, which is the entry point into their API system, is an encrypted channel. And they care about it. So immediately, when you look at what this is doing, it's a little bit better. It's all Bluetooth communication on the inside, and it's all Z-Wave as they do things like light bulbs and that kind of thing. I didn't dig into that too much because I didn't feel it was webby, and I was trying to keep this talk webby as we're here. But when I look at this and how they have it built, simply looking at this diagram tells me these guys are a little bit more on top of software development, right? It tells me that they're a little bit more on top of their game. If you like Groovy and you're good at Groovy, you can write your own apps. This is where SmartThing gets a little bit more interesting, doing things like turning someone else's lights on and off. I wasn't able to test that because, again, it's hard to go calling all your friends and say, who's got one of these things? And I couldn't get a second one to do the test off of. But I couldn't figure out how to do any kind of horizontal privilege escalation just simply because of the way the API was protected. I actually brought this back to the garage door opener company and said, what you need to do is call these people, right? They clearly know how to architect this thing. They'll help you. You're not in the same space. You're not competing with each other. It seems like a good idea. SmartThings website gets an A off SSL Labs. They really seem to have a good understanding of implementation of encrypted security communication. If you look at the SSL Labs report, the API is up there, right? This is how you get to their server. When I look at this, if you aren't familiar with how Amazon does things, the beginning part of this is them setting the availability zone for this application. So the only thing I can think of to sort of attack this surface is to attack one availability zone. It seems like all of their servers are on East. And I'd be willing to bet when Dyn had its problem, they would have had a problem. I wasn't looking at it at the time. So I've got this thing called a canary. It's a little bird that sits on my mantle. It's a camera. More importantly, it's a camera that does motion monitoring, but it does everything through an app. So it knows I'm home because the app constantly beacons my location. Isn't that fun? And it does it in a way that is hyper annoying if you look at the communication flow. The way it works is it says, oh, you're home. What do you want? What is your desired state when you're home? And I have mine set to private, which means the camera won't come on. It doesn't give me any alerts, right? Any of those things. But I have to have geolocation turned on. If I turn geolocation off, it assumes my cell tower's location. I'll show you a picture of that here in a second. But it's a little bit annoying in that it's always doing this chatty communication, and I've talked to them and said, can't I just register my MAC address on my wireless network and then you see my MAC address connect and use that? That's how you know I'm home. And they told me that idea was stupid. Which I said, all right, fine. I come up with stupid ideas all the time. I can split the cert on this. I can view the APIs on it just like the other examples that I had. And if we look at what the APIs look like, they do almost everything in either puts or posts. The parameter setup is almost exactly the same. Authentication passes the username and password in clear text, you know, under the assumption that it's going to be put inside the cert. And then I was watching it communicate, and all of a sudden this request came out. The last line in this request is my car insurance company. How do they know I use State Farm Insurance? This is a question I have for them. I haven't gotten to them yet with this, but it's sitting there beaconing out all this stuff, and one of the things that it's talking about is my insurance company. It's kind of weird. It's also my homeowner's insurance, but I don't know why or how that comes into play. My point with this is our homes aren't really under attack as much as we are under attack by these apps, right? And what I mean by that is when it beacons out, if you have location tracking turned on, 6 digits past the decimal point of GPS accuracy, right? Now this one is beaconing out my cell tower because I don't turn location services on. It doesn't have a way. So what it does is it says, you know, you're within the range of your home cell tower. It kind of registers that, and then it knows, okay, I'm home. But it never really knows I'm home, so I'm always getting false positives of, you know, I walked past the thing, I look at it, and I'm like, yeah, I'm getting, you know, I'm sneaking some food out of the fridge, it's midnight. Whatever, right? So the thing sits there and beacons out. It's about every, I don't know, 8 or 9 minutes, it's sending out my GPS coordinates. Isn't that nice of it? So if you have a Wi-Fi Pineapple and I join your network, you're going to receive beacons from my Canary app of where I am. Well, you should know where I am at that point because you're close enough to me. But if you've got a cantenna and you want to nail it down a bit, you can. You turn the location off, and that really accurate GPS position becomes the cell tower. If you leave it off, though, your camera constantly says, oh, you're not home, and turns on, right? And whatever it's on state is usually recording, and so it starts telling you about these things. So as we know, I split the cert open, and that immediately tells me that they've got some kind of problem. When I threw it up in SSL Labs, I got a B on these guys, and their key exchange is the reason why they're getting knocked down. But I will say this. While I was doing the stripping of the SSL and replacing the cert, I could not shift my camera out of privacy mode and start recording. So they at least recognize that there's a third party that could be, you know, watching the communication, and it wouldn't let me start turning the camera on. So I was pretty happy about that. I mean, they've done something, right? Put a little bit of protection in there. And they also flash up a little warning that says, you know, this communication may be monitored. My Android does that as well, right? Every time I reboot my phone now, it tells me there's a third party. It's because I installed my burp cert. I'm doing that, I'm telling you guys this so that you're not surprised by it. If you go home and you want to try to do this kind of stuff, and your phone starts barking at you because maybe there's a third party watching. You're the third party. It's the cert that you installed. So the title of my talk had to do with being home. For me, my home about 200 nights a year is probably some Hilton somewhere. I fly around a lot and stuff. And Hilton came out with this thing called a digital key, right? Akin to the garage door opener, you use an app to open the phone, to open your door. The app actually uses Bluetooth to tell the door open, right? So if any of you guys are Bluetooth hackers, please go get a room at a Hilton and do this, because I really want to know. But the registration process requires you to check in over the mobile app. So when you go to do the check-in, it's going to say, what room would you like? So you tell it, I would like this room. See where it says room requested? It also says, do you want to park a car? And I said, yeah, I got to park a car. Well, here's how much we're going to charge you. Could anybody think of a way that I might manipulate this request so that I might not have to pay so much money for anything? Can you imagine if I made that minus $1,000, right? So two of my employees are sitting here, Frank and Dave, and Frank asked Hilton this question several months ago.
It was about 6 months.
6 months ago, he said, has anybody looked at the security of this thing? And the CISO came back and said, 94% of our guests could care less, basically. I care, and it turns out I'd be willing to bet the local Hilton would care if I were to submit a negative $1,000 parking charge per night and show up with, you know, we owe you $5,000 for your stay, you know. I think it's something that they would care about, and I think it's something that the CISO would you know, sort of turn down the whole, nah, it's fine, everybody loves this thing. It's a little bit annoying, this digital key thing is a little bit annoying because then it becomes this thing that you have to make work all the time. So I got to get the elevator to go up, stupid, and then the Bluetooth for the elevator next to it is the one that it's signing to, and it, you know, I can't get it to work. Parking garage, push the button and you want the gate to go up and the other one goes up. These are all problems that I've had with it. But if you want to tear apart this Hilton digital key thing, it is a lot of fun to have a good look at. Additionally, because I travel so much, I rent cars an awful lot, and National Car Rental has a similar thing. Hey, you can check yourself out. Isn't that cool? And they put a QR code on the outside of the car, and you say, I'm standing in front of the car I want, and it says, all right, take a picture of the QR code, and you hold your phone up to it, and it dumps, this is the URL that comes off this QR code. It's the car's outside, it's a Hyundai Santa Fe. I think 6LS2 is the color because it tells me white later, and that's not in this, or it's picking it out of the VIN. Does anybody want to go generate a few QR codes and see what we can do with this? I'm wondering if we were to repeat this same QR code, if it would really cause a tremendous amount of shenanigans with their systems, right? Everybody's trying to check out the same car. I'm sure it would say that car's checked out, and it would just give an error. But if you put those on every car in the parking lot, it would, you know, sort of screw their system up. And can you imagine trying to troubleshoot that? Because you'd scan it and it works, you know, once. It just never works again. So what if 30 cars had the same, or all of them? Shenanigans are possible, and these are the kinds of security implications that we don't see people caring about, right? Hilton doesn't care that I can maybe submit a negative amount for the amount of parking that they're going to charge me. And I'd be willing to bet that National doesn't care really about all the stuff that comes out of this. I think what they were trying to do with that scan the QR code thing was allow you to rate the car. So that way you could say, I like this car or I hated it, and they could get them out of their fleet, right, if they were bad, or invest in them if they couldn't. So the question that I asked, are you exposing your home to an attack? If you have a specific type of garage door opener, maybe. But it seems that there is a little bit of categorical information we can drag out of this. It seems that these guys that are writing these mobile apps don't really understand that you're passing really important data inside a communication stream that can be broken. And that's something that they should probably focus on. their API endpoints are so easy to understand. So you can just look at them and figure out what it is that you want to do. Write your own mobile app to allow for any kind of shenanigans that you can imagine. So are we open to an attack? The answer may be yes, and the answer may be no. It really depends on your positioning with the technologies that you plugged in at your house. But I think that just walking around with a cell phone is sort of putting you under attack, especially if you have these devices, because of all the beacons that come out of them. They need to understand state all the time and where you're located. You know, my canary doesn't understand when I go to Europe. It just really doesn't get it. You know, I'm so far off the GPS grid that it's confused and it tries to turn on all the time and turn off. I've complained to them about it a bunch. I'm not home. Stop it. So to answer the question, to TLDR this thing, the answer is it depends, which is the perfect IT answer to give for everything, right? It really does depend, and we have to chew through it a little bit more. I'm actually ahead of schedule, so the Q&A is giving me the 5-minute sign. We're going to go into Q&A quicker. I really like to thank you guys for coming out. I'm going to give my sponsor pitch now. A bunch of sponsors paid to come here and do things. You know, stop by their booths and chat with them. They make great products. They do lots of great things out there. They're trying to help you guys solve problems. I'm one of them, right? So I'm happy to talk to you about my things. We've got a lot of guys here. LASCON has been a conference that I've come to for several years now. It's one of my favorite conferences. The year that we had the video games was awesome. You know, so if any of the LASCON guys are listening, bring back the video games. But the reality of it is finding conferences that are AppSec related is hard, right? AppSec USA, that travels around, is a good one. AppSec Cali is a good one. It's in Southern California. LASCON, you know, I've named 3 and I think I've hit the end. Like there's not that many conferences that are like this that are out there. So if you guys could give a big round of applause to the sponsors, to the guys that got this thing going, and the folks that keep it going every year, I'd really appreciate it. Thanks for your time.